Drilling fluids touch just about everything in the drilling process. We're here to deconstruct the drilling process and drilling fluid concepts to provide a deeper understanding of our industry. In each episode, we'll share information, talk to interesting people, and maybe share a few stories along the way. Welcome to the Flowline, a production of AES Drilling Fluids, brought to you by Matt Offenbacher and Justin Gauthier.
Everybody, welcome back to another episode. Matt Offenbacher are back. Matt Offenbacher and I are back here for another wonderful episode. I'm excited. Again, like we mentioned in a previous episode, we're in our sort of new upgraded studio. Excited about that. But Matt, I think it's a fitting time to get an update on the Astros. For the first few games that I was paying attention to, it seemed to go pretty well. And curious to hear your take. How's the season kicking off?
I mean, it's early, so it's kind of frustrating right now because the offense really hasn't done much. And they've won a couple of games, and now they've, lost several.
Okay.
So, it was just frustrating. Back into the rotation, I felt like Ditto has done okay, but then nobody scores any runs, and it's just kind of like, okay, we lost 3-1. Well, I can only blame the pitcher so much when nobody hit.
Right.
But everybody freaks out about this stuff. It's a long season. The bats will come alive.
Yeah.
But I want my team to win now.
Right.
So it's just such a different team. It's like there's a lot of things to see, a lot of sort of unknowns, but also exciting things. So
Okay.
yeah, I got to go to opening day, which was really special.
Heck yeah.
And then, I hope to, when they start rolling in the day games, I'll go to some of those. And, the nice thing is my wife as a teacher has summers off. And so she becomes progressively more patient with me when she's not working, which allows me to, on a random Tuesday night, be like, hey, can I go to the Astros game?
Yeah.
And I think, with my son, my oldest being a little older, I think we will get a few more of those where we can just sort of pop in on a Saturday or something. So, living near the ballpark is a blessing for an Astros fan.
Big times. What are your thoughts around the whole Daikin Park? Have you noticed any changes, upgrades, besides a smaller sign that to me is not very appealing?
It's weird. So the big thing was the train, right? Like the train used to have all these oranges in it. And then the big reveal on opening day was it's filled with a bunch of baseballs reflecting, the history of the Astros and everything.
Oh, I didn't know if there was going to be a bunch of HVAC units and stuff in there.
I was expecting window units. I thought just a bunch of window units all stacked awkwardly. That was kind of, or ice cubes. I thought that would be.
Yeah.
So, the thing is the ballpark for being 25 years old is really not bad.
No,
but I was like, if you put your namesake on this, you would crush it if you upgraded the Wi-Fi, because it drives me nuts. If I can't tell what's going on, I'm neurotically refreshing Twitter trying to see what the TV broadcasters are saying or stuff like that.
Okay.
And then the other thing was just the AC was not great at the end of last year.
It was getting hot in there.
Well, it's just when it's really hot outside, they don't close the roof till right before. And I know that the Sports Authority was going to give them some money to upgrade the AC. But if you're an AC company, let's make sure that's fixed. This is sort of your brand.
Yeah.
You should be cool and comfortable in that place at all times.
No kidding.
If you're going to, put your name on the side of the building. So I think we will get there, but I feel like if, I guess it depends on what your goals are, but it would have been awesome if it was man, all of a sudden, the Wi-Fi is awesome. I'm way more comfortable, all those kinds of things.
To
then
me,
you're wow, these guys are great.
Yeah.
You get a little more brand equity out of that.
Come in with a bit of a splash if you're going to take over Minute Maid, because Minute Maid had I don't know, it had such a name and just something memorable, right? It had some nostalgia to it. It's been, how long was Minute Maid?
Golly. Probably 23 years or something. Because
that's crazy.
First it was some very generic name before they sold the naming rights. Then it was Enron Field. That didn't last. And then Minute Maid took over.
Okay.
So
I didn't know Enron is called Enron Field at one time.
yeah,
That's pretty cool.
oh yeah. So
Wild. Last thing on the baseball front, you talked about offense, Matt. I'm curious to hear, what do you think of the whole torpedo bat that the Yankees are using to just hit bombs left, right, and center?
I mean, I think it's just poor sample space. Like, it's exciting and interesting, and I have other conspiracy theories about the Yankees and juiced balls and that kind of thing.
Okay,
But
tell us more.
So there is actually somebody out there, a physicist, who's like, get me more baseballs from these Aaron Judge home runs and everything, because he was breaking records. And one, right field for the Yankees, like, there's a lot of home runs that would only be home runs in Yankee Stadium. So it's like, okay, if you play 81 of your games there,
Yeah.
You could argue the same thing with the Astros, where the Crawford boxes are shallow.
Yeah.
But at least the wall's high. But anyways, all that being said, so there, it was like, gee, statistically, these balls are flying a little further, and it happens to be with particular, situations and not others. And so, like, tinfoil hat, like MLB trying to make things exciting or whatever. Not sure if it's true, but it's fun to think about.
Yeah.
The torpedo bat thing is a bit funny because if you look into the history of it, other people have used them last season. Like,
It's not a new thing.
This isn't, like, people have dabbled. And I feel like it's like with a golf ball, where, like, if you had extra divots, like, you can get non-regulation golf balls that are supposed to fly further.
Yeah.
And you know what they say? Don't use them. Like, I feel like people would have known that torpedo bats were better long before this,
Sure.
but people have used them in the past, weren't as successful. So we'll see. I think it's probably more of a sample space thing than, like, oh my gosh, these bats are like, it's going to raise your batting average by like 300 points by using it.
Yeah.
So I'm still a little skeptical, but it's also one of those, with all the hype and everything, just to level the playing field. I don't understand why MLB just says keep the bats the way they should be.
Yeah.
So
No, it's an interesting sort of thought experiment, I guess. But are there more home runs being hit as of late, like over the last few seasons, or do you know much about the stats on that?
So with the torpedo bats, the Yankees had like 9 home runs in a game. They broke a record.
Yeah.
And it was like 2 games in, and everybody's like, it's these torpedo bats. And, like, everybody was using them pretty much on the team. So everybody's like, well, that's what it's got to be.
Sure.
And I mean, the Yankees have a pretty good lineup, but, like, not outstanding. And so in light of that, it's like, oh, I think Aaron Judge hit like 3 or 4 home runs.
Yeah.
I mean, it was crazy. So it's like, oh my gosh, this is what it must be. And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So small sample space, it could be like a lot of other things too, where you figure out how to pitch to somebody where you're supposed to barrel the bat in a different spot, and you just make it harder to get contact or something. Like,
Yeah.
it could just be a few more games and people start figuring out what to do. I don't know.
Right. No, I'm interested to see how that plays out, because there's obviously a lot of hype around it. And when you break a record like that, when it comes to home runs, it's everyone's sort of paying attention as to, like, what it could be, to your point, like, the sample space is small, but when that's all you have at the time, it's like, let's make it exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, enough about that. We've almost spent 10 minutes of banter, which, again, for those who don't care, you can fast forward. But for those who do, hopefully got a good chuckle and a little bit of a good story. Anyways, drilling fluids related. Matt, when it comes down to drilling a well, most people key in on something very important, which is economics, right? And so I think when it comes to drilling fluids, although we're not a huge piece of the overall pie, it's enough where people pay attention. And it's not just about sack price, but there's really a lot that goes into sort of the overall cost related to drilling fluids. And so I think a good topic would be sort of the hidden cost to consider for drilling fluids. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. We're always tempted to do this sort of reductionist thing where it's like, oh, I want this because it's cheaper. And you're like, well, is it?
Right.
And then, okay, let's get a little higher up from, like, this one little granule and look at the whole beach, and oh, maybe it's not. So understanding those relationships, I think, is really where you save the most money and have the best perspective. So hopefully this offers something along those lines.
Gotcha. And I do want to highlight for this episode the name Beyond a Barrel. Did you come up with that? Because that's pretty. I like that. That's if we had another podcast, I think Beyond a Barrel would be a cool name. But I don't think we need two.
No.
One's good enough.
Yeah.
But
we get bored later.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Matt, let's talk about, and folks out there, it's more of sort of like an economics type of, I guess, term, but explain what time value of money is for those who may not be aware.
Well, trying to have our high level perspective, like, what do we think? Well, like when we talk to our customers, say, I want to drill fast. Well, why do you want to drill fast? It's cheaper. I save money. Well, why? Like, what does that get you?
All right.
So let's go back to why you're even drilling the well in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Probably to make money.
Right.
I had a friend who, in middle school, they said, why did the author write this book? And he wrote to make money, and they counted it wrong on the test. And I fundamentally disagreed with the teacher.
Right.
But,
and rightfully so.
Yeah. I mean, like, look, maybe they had something to talk about, but it was a job.
Yeah.
Well,
that's all. Who was your friend? That's pretty intuitive. I like that.
Kid down the street, Eddie.
Freaking Eddie. He's probably crushing life right now.
I hope so.
He probably failed in school, but it's like doing better than like 95% of people he graduated with.
Exactly. I hope so. So, anyways, like so people buy this stuff, oil and gas companies, sometimes they're private equity, sometimes they're publicly traded companies, but they buy the rights to drill and produce in that rock, right? The whole argument though is I don't make any money until oil starts coming out of the ground and I can sell it. So there is a time when I lay out cash and a time when I start getting money back. I mean, this is like a lot of other investments, right? Like you loan somebody money to start a business and you don't get a return right away, but like if the business crushes it, you may do really well. But let's say there's delays and things don't go as well, they're opening a coffee shop and they can't get permits or, that kind of thing. And now, like, to get your money back takes longer, and that wasn't as good of an investment as another choice you had. Well, think of a bunch of oil and gas companies saying, please give us your money, you're going to make more money back, and we're the best investment. Well, that's sort of that time value of money or net present value. What is my best choice to invest right now to make the most money? And when you think about how fast you're going to get oil out of the ground, there are some things that are pretty straightforward and fixed as far as costs. You're going to pay royalties. You're not going to pay right. You got to pay for certain things like gathering costs, water handling. If I need to put in a pipeline or someplace to store the oil, but that's something I can do offline, right? Like I don't need the well to be finished before I can do that. No. I can just start doing that, and if there's a couple of bad weather days, I can just make sure it's done before the well is finished.
Sure.
However, for oil to flow, the well has to be there. There's no choice, right? And even fracking, for that matter, frack scheduling matters, and you hear that story all the time. But like once you're rigged up and pumping, that's kind of like a very regimented, structured thing. There's not too many surprises there. I mean, things go wrong, but not very often.
Right.
On the drilling side, though, this is one of the things that I really can control. And let's say I need to put 10 wells into the ground for this project. And I have a certain budget, your AFE, you've made all these plans, and we have a bunch of problems drilling. Well, that may delay my investment horizon by 3-6 months, what have you. And now investors are going to be really mad, right? So controlling this particular thing, this is why we drill 24/7 a lot of the times. This is why we're always focused on these efficiencies and moving fast. It's because basically on the drilling side, we are one of the very few things that is variable that you can either lower cost or you can increase them and make that investment better or worse relative to the cost of specific things like a pipeline or the cost of, other fairly somewhat predictable things that can be done offline. So that's why understanding the whole cost of your drilling fluids and the whole cost of your well, for that matter, can be so impactful.
Yeah. No, it kind of comes back to sort of, if you're in supply chain, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot because like the total cost of ownership, right? So that kind of plays into that where it's like, it's not just about the sack price, but it's the overall sort of, life cycle of the drilling fluids and what it impacts and the costs associated with those. So let's start kind of at a very base level, and talking about the base fluid cost. Because I think that when a lot of people talk drilling fluids and they look at, say, a bid that we would provide as the drilling fluids provider, most of the time, unless we're doing synthetic and we're providing that, is you're looking at, per unit cost. So separating that from the base fluid, because you need a base fluid, talk about the cost piece of that.
Yeah, so we've had a few things come up where folks move around. Let's say all that attractive natural gas now that prices are getting somewhere. They look to drill other places, and their sort of home base is West Texas, and they say, "Look, I can get sodium chloride brine for like $5 a barrel. Like, it's nothing."
Right.
But I mean, I think we had an instance with a customer who said from a trucking and logistics perspective, we do not want to ship brine. We'll mix it on location because we have fast line and water's readily available. Well, okay. So, but dry salt and mixing time adds costs. You move to, areas where they don't have a bunch of salt caverns to produce brine water, and all of a sudden, it may cost an order of magnitude more. And then all of a sudden, all of your economics change for even just brine. In California, I know when I was involved in projects there, calcium chloride was like super cheap. And so it made a lot of sense. I mean, it's relatively inexpensive, but it was really cheap there because you were right near the source.
Yeah.
So there was a big driver to be able to use calcium chloride as a base fluid. They didn't care, and it was like, well, calcium doesn't like a lot of our, we've gone through all that, but it made sense to try and make that work because our base fluid was so cheap.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't do the same thing in West Texas. So understanding those things where it's like, even if I can get a barrel of this cheaper, is that barrel on my location, and how does it affect everything else?
Right.
And then base oils, sometimes we'll have folks say like, wow, I really enjoyed using your base oil, from the Northeast that I, sort of when I broke out. Can you bring it to another place? Well, yes, but if it's an area where they're already using a different base oil and we have to keep systems isolated and that sort of thing, that's a lot more expensive than the pricing you were used to in that other location.
Right.
The other thing is there's a base oil that is used a ton in Canada. And Canada has these, seasonality, right? Everything freezes and then we have breakup. And so when things slow down during the warmer months, there's an abundance of this base oil available. And there's, folks saying, hey, I can get you a really good price on this.
Yeah.
Well, about the time someone's ready to make the switch, demand goes up back up there. And so you may not actually be able to get it. Or you're bidding against, local folks where there's no shipping costs. So even if you get quoted it, can you get it?
Right.
And so I think those are a couple other base oils that we've had, customers want to try. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself in the environmental, but IO 1618 is what's used in the Gulf of Mexico. And the testing is all, environmental compatibility testing is all based on IO 1618. So you could say, yes, I want to use another base oil, but it would need to pass all of those environmental tests. Everybody else is already using the other stuff.
Yep.
Do you want to mix it? It's just another reason where base fluid cost, even it appears cheaper, may actually cost more in the mix of the business model of how it's used in that location.
Sure. No, that's a good point. Moving on to the disposal side of it, and this is one that, oftentimes it'd be nice if somehow, we had a bit more visibility on disposal costs. I mean, obviously it's not really our sandbox, but when you're trying to make different fluid selections, when you're trying to do an analysis on sort of costs, we provide what we believe our cost will be. And then, a drilling engineer, the operator will then do their assessment on, one versus the other. But it would be kind of nice to help support on that. But it's, again, you can only get, so much data, from different service providers. But talk about disposal, man. I kind of already got going on it. But this one, I think, is something that really, for me, it's like beyond the drilling fluids side of it. It kind of gets a little bit gray. And I know sort of it's like, well, obviously oil-based mud is more expensive than water-based, but there's a bit more to it.
Absolutely. I mean, there is this question of, cuttings, it depends on what's on them, right? Is it diesel-based mud, synthetic, water-based? So even the amount of salt on it can matter in certain areas.
Right.
In some places, they're going to treat it all the same. So your disposal cost, even if you're like, oh, well, water-based mud is cheaper, it may not be as cheap as you think when you have to get into disposal and that kind of thing. Or it may be, you know what, actually, they'll let you bury synthetic-based cuttings because the biodegradation data is acceptable and that sort of thing.
Right.
And there would be a huge incentive to pay more for base soil to lower your disposal cost. So understanding those things and the distinctions can get very, very localized. Because even like, what is the distance to the disposal site? There were a lot of projects looking at thermal desorption and other ways to sort of clean up cuttings and recover oil. And when you had a bunch of drilling locations doing the same thing, you could sort of put a central processing area next to those rigs, so it didn't have to truck anything far, and that those things could make sense. So there's just a lot of moving parts. The synthetic aspect versus diesel is, hey, do I get anything favorable from can I show better biodegradation data? Can I show something where it's more environmentally friendly and therefore a regulator would accept, disposing on site? There are some areas, I know in South Texas, where it was up to the landowner, and a lot of them would say, yeah, if you use synthetic-based mud, you can dispose of it on my property. And so it's like, okay, well, that saves a lot of money, even though the base oil is going to cost more and the per barrel cost of the mud is going to be higher.
Right.
So, those things, we published a paper in the Northeast kind of talking about synthetic versus water-based mud. This had more to do with community relations and everything, trying to get out of there faster.
Yeah.
But dilution rates. So I use water-based mud, but my disposal cost is high. I'm gonna have more volume I have to dispose of, more cuttings disposal, where a tightly run oil-based mud isn't gonna have that. So it's fewer trucks, less volume to dispose of. And if you're worried about that in sort of a local perspective, and you might save some money there.
Right.
Offshore, if you're allowed to discharge offshore, I mean, it's a lot cheaper than boating it back to shore, right? And finding a site. So a big thing is finding, using materials that will meet those environmental regulations and get the testing to show that they are valid, that they're acceptable. Because hauling all that stuff back to shore can be very expensive. And then in the grand scheme of things, just think about all your equipment, right? Like solids control saves money, but it also affects, you might add extra equipment to save more money. And, even waste handling, how you transfer things, where you put them, how you place them, those things can all drive rig time. So disposal is probably sort of one of the very large fluids-related questions. And like you said, I wish we had better visibility on it.
Yeah.
In many cases to help with that conversation.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's talk about a big one that everyone talks about and is always trying to cut down on is drilling days and then associated risks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what have you heard a good spread rate number lately?
I want to say, actually, me and a drilling engineer were talking about the other day. It was like 3,300 an hour or something like that. And again, when you say spread rate, sometimes people say, there's like the day rate, which is like that, say 22 to 28,000 per day for a rig. But the full spread, I think, could be like well above that.
Yeah,
especially
so
3,300 an hour. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, so let's say it's 80 grand or something a day just to have everybody there, have moving parts and all that stuff, right? And so if you can knock a day off, you save a lot of money. So drilling fast can matter a lot, and relative to your mud bill could make your mud bill far less material if you can save on that time. And that's just the time to install the well. Let's say you drill 10 wells and you finish each one 2 days earlier, you save 20 days. Like, now we get to that net present value thing.
Yeah.
Our economics look really good. And then, the other risks, like, I want to go with water-based mud because the per barrel cost is cheaper, but you're drilling through a really reactive, nasty formation. Does that then slow down your drilling, create more incidents with your wellbore? And now maybe it's not cheaper because you added a couple of days you didn't anticipate.
Yeah. Well, it's that common, like, oh, you can get to your intermediate casing point so fast, but then it takes twice as long to get out of the hole to run pipe.
Yeah.
So that's a common sort of dilemma that you run into.
Absolutely. Yeah, mid-con in the house. Yeah, but I mean, other risks, stuck pipe. So I know plenty of campaigns where they drill with oil-based mud, everything's going really well, and then they say, okay, what can we do to lower costs further? Switch to water-based mud, and can't stop getting stuck. And it's like, okay, was this worth it as you lose time? All things being equal. Other risks. I mean, I will add, like, on the drilling days and logistics. Like, this is where this is where we de-risk through data, understanding offsets, making good recommendations, even for the right mud weight, understanding where we might have losses, understanding where it's not a good idea to drill with a certain fluid or where it's totally worth it. Like, de-risking is a big part of our business. The right thing at the right time. But, the other part of it is, let's say, going on losses, right? Like, do you have to wait because you don't have mud to keep the hole full? Are you waiting on bayrite? Those are things that we are very adamant to keep our customers from doing, which I think is why sort of our brand has been so focused on having, control of facilities and making sure that we're not waiting in line behind anybody. Our customers get something without waiting for us in any way.
Yeah. No, and then that control over our own operations is huge because, especially in the unconventional world, is, for a long time and years, it was, we talk about shaving days, and now it's gotten so efficient to where it's like shaving hours and even minutes to that degree. Talk about connection time. It's like, we're not talking, 10, 15 minutes. Like, we're talking a matter of seconds sometimes. Like, if we can shave 10 seconds off a connection, you extrapolate that over the course of a year over 10 rigs, that's time, right?
It adds up. Yep.
And so for us, on the logistics side and infrastructure side is, waiting on trucks. I mean, again, it's, the oil field, so there's going to be times where you have to wait. It's just the nature of our business. But yeah, that again, and even for us has gotten better and better, just being more efficient. And so, but that, again, when you think about sort of the overall cost on the drilling fluid side, I think sometimes logistics doesn't necessarily part of the conversation when operators are trying to make a decision on, who they maybe should select or whatever. But the logistics piece is huge.
Yeah, I think what's hard about that is you don't notice until there's a problem, right? If everything shows up, that becomes the standard. But it takes a lot of commitment to make sure that everything's always there on time. And so to be able to do that again and again and again is a big undertaking. But it goes unnoticed because it was just there, right? Like, you didn't miss a beat.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a big one. And, that whole logistics piece, even kind of tying into just having things where they need to be at the time they need to be there. There might be something that appears cheaper until you have to bring it in from somewhere else. Or let's say there's longer lead times. You want to use a product that nobody's really using in an area and it comes from Europe and there's not a lot of inventory sitting around. Now, hey, you want to use it tomorrow, but unless you're going to put it on an airplane, it's not going to be there. So I think there's a lot on the logistics front of just not only product availability, but product availability and product availability in the quantities you need when you need them.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Without, and look, it's going to crush your business if you just sit on a bunch of inventory hoping somebody's going to buy it. So like you have to have real demand for this stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Another one that folks don't often think about is the regulations. And I know for, operators, they're dealing with regulations all the time, but speak a little bit on that part.
Yeah, I mean, from a compliance perspective, there can be a lot of things that may lead to delays if you want a particular material. And it could be, is it registered in the jurisdiction where it needs to be, if it needs to be, in Europe or um, Canada or wherever. There are clearly distinctions and requirements, and also possibly a requirement to demonstrate compliance. Are you prepared for that? I think there are even products. I mean, I'm surprised to see a number of products being used that have really low flash points, and there's extra handling, OSHA requirements for limiting fire risk at the rig. And so are those things being followed? There's added cost to storing those things appropriately, grounding, training maybe. And so there can be a lot more to that other than just, I want this thing.
Right.
And once again, going back to minimizing risk, risk of a fire. So like, do you really even want this here? Or do you just pick something else? And, environmentally, it goes back to, some areas, and this is maybe less so on U.S. land, but, no chlorides is a common one. Okay, what do I do? Or, there can only be a certain amount of oil, hydrocarbon residual on the cuttings. And that, it may be that your lubricant has something that shows up as a hydrocarbon. So now do you need a different lubricant? What are you going to do to stay compliant?
Yeah.
You have to alter that formulation. So there's just a lot of this stuff that there are important exercises to go through beyond just this barrel of mud or this sack is cheaper than this one. That's why I want to use it. Because we generally have these rules of thumb that we abide by, where water-based mud is usually cheaper than oil-based mud. Synthetic is more expensive than everything. But there's a reason people use them, and it's because this bigger economic picture says that it's worth it. That's the best return on the investment. And so we want to weigh all of it when we make these decisions about what fluids and fluid products we're going to use.
That's true. And something else that I think is a big one that I'd like to bring up that's worth the conversation is when you talk about engineering service. There's a lot of push. It kind of comes in waves, but when you get really good at drilling wells in a certain area, there's oftentimes thought of, well, heck, we've got 24-hour service on 5 rigs. Why not just have a drive-by that kind of handle all of it? And so that conversation often leads to, well, yeah, when you look at it on paper, it makes total sense. But when you look at sort of the risk associated with that, there's, I think a lot of times folks take for granted what mud engineers do on a rig, on the day-to-day, and sort of the keeping you out of trouble type of deal, especially, derrick hands aren't that experienced. And so, that's another big one to look at when thinking, oh, it can't be that hard. They just do a couple mud checks, and, the oil-based mud just kind of runs itself. And but then lo and behold, there's all this background stuff that they're doing nonstop. And so that's kind of another interesting one to speak on. And then that kind of even goes further into, kind of where we're at in the drilling world with regards to automation and things like that. It's looking at, now with these remote ops centers, you can, directionally drill wells from an ops center. And so you're taking essentially, people off the rig, putting them in an office, and because the technology has allowed us to do that. But what are the unintended consequences there, and sort of the costs that could be, that you could be hit with because you don't have someone out there? And so that's more of like a forward-looking sort of thought beyond what we're talking about, like as it stands today. But the mud engineering cost is always one that gets brought up, and it takes one little hiccup on a rig to paper itself. And
Yes.
Again, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a few different things. I think we do a bad job, and look, most of our customers experience communication every day by looking at a mud check. And then they just look at like low gravity solids and cost, and that sort of dictates their response for the day. And I would say that probably a little too broadly, but
Sure.
the point is, if all they're doing is a mud check and everything looks fine, there's a reason it looks fine. And that's what happened when the mud check, leading up to the mud check. And what we tend to find is spills and other things that tend to happen when it's like, well, we don't really need these guys, is there's a huge disconnect between all of the other things a mud engineer is doing and being asked to do, frankly, that don't follow with, well, we just run a mud check and make sure the properties look good, and they always look pretty good. And so, well-controlled losses, some of these things, they tend to all happen at once. I mean, drive-by sucks because it seems like every rig gets stuck or goes on losses at the same time.
Right.
But the other part of it is I was shocked at, when I've gone out, how much the mud engineers are directing traffic on the rig. And it's a lot more than people realize. Like, they are part of the team. They're helping with safety. They're helping with fluid movement, that kind of thing. And the big mistake is, I think people try and mix directional and mud because they're both the surface hands that are out there all the time.
Yeah.
And the big disconnect I see is, at least with directional, a lot of times it was somebody who sat in their little shack, didn't really interact with anybody, and didn't need to, frankly, but like, you hardly saw them. And not only that, but the bit is 2 miles away from you. So whether you're doing that 10,000 miles away or 2, I don't know if it matters. It's still remote management.
Sure.
But all of your actions, all of your responses can be controlled remotely.
Yeah.
Where with drilling fluid, the monitoring, I think, helps create a consensus. But an automated mud checker does not replace all the other things that a mud engineer does. And the more added reporting, I mean, even, having a delivery and walking a fuel delivery truck guy through, getting them lined up to bring on fuel. And it's like, okay, it's not my job, but it's what the rig needs. Like, those things come up, and that's sort of your last line of defense, because from there it goes to the rig crew. And, I'm not saying they're not doing their jobs, but you have that very, very inconsistent level of experience from rig to rig.
Right.
And so I think a lot of our mud engineers are doing a lot more things in the backyard, a lot of other places that don't line up with just running a mud check or just telling somebody to cut some sacks. But the problem is, like, it's just part of the job. Like, they don't, like, you can't go to the customer and be like, I would like a pat on the back for monitoring a fluids transfer and doing doing these things.
Yeah.
They're just happening and no one's noticing. And then when you pull that person away from there, it may not be the first well, but you notice.
Yeah. No, we've gone through a few exercises where we've pulled mud engineers off the rig and done drive-by instead. And lo and behold, we always end up going back to 24-hour service. But sometimes you have to go through it and really lay it out, or, do a really good sort of, we've put together sort of, pros and cons with it. And the cons definitely outweigh the pros. And then folks are like, oh, yeah, when you really put it like that, it makes sense why you're really promoting 24-hour service. But anyway, that's another piece to this. That's all I can think of, Matt. Any sort of takeaways or last final words before we wrap it up?
No, I mean, I think we ran through, but I'm sure we missed some things, but it is the big picture. All this stuff sort of affects other things. And that's why, having some knowledge and some data really, really helps you get the best outcome possible.
Most definitely. And if anyone out there has any thoughts around it or wants us to sort of answer any questions, please reach out to us. You can hit us up on LinkedIn, or you can reach us at the Flowline podcast at aesfluids.com. And with that being said, everyone, take care for now. Enjoy the spring. It's upon us now, and so hopefully everyone's enjoying that. Take care. Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. Please tune in next week for another exciting episode of the Flowline. And remember, may your returns always be full and your trips always smooth. Views expressed in this program belong to participants and not their employees. The program is for informational purposes only and cannot take the place of seeking professional advice. Copyright AES Drilling Fluids.